Heinrich's contribution to the techniques of field archaeology was not inconsiderable. When 20th century archaeologists attack him for destroying en route relics he had not planned to discover, they forget the primitive state of archaeology in his day. In stratigraphy, he pioneered by applying to human relics the principles that others had already applied to geology. Homer's Iliad was not mere humanized sun myths, as the over-subtle German scholars were then insisting. Even by his mistake, Schliemann proved the reality of a Homeric civilization by unearthing the pre-Homeric civilization out of which it grew. To the canonical four civilizations, Babylonia, Egypt, Greece, and Rome, he added two more from prehistory. If there were these two, then why not many more? Schliemann's successor, Sir Arthur Evans, who took up his clues to unearth still another scintillating civilization at Knossos in Crete in 1900, acknowledged his debt. Quote, "Less than a generation back, the origin of Greek civilization, and with it the sources of all great culture that has ever been, were wrapped in an impenetrable mist. That ancient world was still girt round within its narrow confines by the circling stream of ocean. Was there anything beyond? The fabled kings and heroes of the Homeric age, with their palaces and strongholds, where they ought, after all, but more or less humanized sun myths? One man had faith, accompanied by works, and in Dr. Schliemann, the science of classical antiquity found its Columbus. Armed with the spade, he brought to light from beneath the mounds of ages a real Troy. At Tiryns and Mycenae, he laid bare the palace and the tombs and treasures of Homeric kings. A new world opened to investigation, and the discoveries of its first explorer were followed up successfully by Dr. Tsauntas and others on Greek soil. The eyes of observers were opened, and the traces of this prehistoric civilization began to make their appearance far beyond the limits of Greece itself." End of quote. But jealousy of scholarly competitors and the needs of sensational journalism made the glitter of Trojan and Mycenaean gold seem an indictment. Was Schliemann only a mercenary treasure hunter, like others less celebrated? Did he care less to enrich knowledge than to fill his own coffers? Even these accusations had the advantage of focusing public interest on the new worlds of archaeology, but they were unfounded. If Schliemann had not quickly removed the Trojan treasure from Turkey, there would have been little left for historians to study. To the Greek nation, he gave all the treasure he unearthed at Mycenae and elsewhere, now splendidly displayed in the Museum at Athens. For all his labors and risks, financed by him personally, he had no compensation except his celebrity and the satisfaction of kindling enthusiasm for his beloved Greece. In the new world of publicity, others did Schliemann's work for him. Back in Winckelmann's time, to be stirred by his enthusiasm for classical Greece, you had to read his books. But now, with Schliemann's own shrewd assist, every turn of the archaeologist's spade became news. The reading public did not have to wait for heavy tomes to enjoy the adventures of excavation. Newspaper readers held their breath, watching daily for Schliemann's dispatches to the Times of London, the Daily Telegraph, and the New York Times. The Turkish government's refusal of a permit or the arrogance of a petty official became an international cause célèbre, advertised in letters from Schliemann himself, or in lengthy reports with others' bylines but later revealed to be his work. Of course, he was made a fellow of honorary and learned societies, and even the Lunders Grocers Association invited him to lecture and elected him to membership. His portrait by an artist of the Illustrated London News was reprinted across the world, making a trademark of Schliemann's broad forehead and heavy mustache, and reporters inventoried his dandyish wardrobe of 50 suits, 20 hats, 42 pairs of shoes, 30 walking sticks, and 15 riding crops. When Dom Pedro II, Emperor of Brazil, a devotee of the classics, came with his empress to visit Turkey, Schliemann, using his fluent Portuguese, toured them through the digs at Hissarlik, after which the emperor declared himself fully persuaded that this was the true site of Homer's Troy. At Mycenae, the emperor's party was served a sensational luncheon in the depths of the famous treasury of Atreus, to the delight of the avid press corps. Sophia, of course, added a touch of living romance not commonly found at prehistoric diggings. Heinrich and Sophia became the royal family of archaeology. The young Greek beauty was a welcome variant on the stereotype of fragile Victorian femininity. Quote, "The part I have taken in the discoveries is but small," she modestly confessed, "in Troy as well as in Mycenae. I have only superintended 30 workmen." End of quote. After the upper layer of pebbles was removed from the tombs in Mycenae, "From thence it was exceedingly difficult," she said, "because on our knees in the mud my husband and I had to cut out the pebbles, to cut away the layer of clay, and to take out one by one the precious jewels." End of quote. In London, the Royal Archaeological Institute held a special meeting on June 8, 1877, to honor Heinrich and Sophia. The spotlight was on the glowing Sophia, doubly escorted into the hall on the arm of Lord Talbot, the president, and of William E. Gladstone, who had requested the privilege. The address was given by Sophia. Lord Talbot had praised her as, quote, "the first lady who has ever been identified in a work so arduous and stupendous. You have achieved a reputation which many will envy, some may emulate, but none can ever surpass." End of quote. The address of the 25-year-old Sophia dazzled by its erudition and eloquence. In her admiration for Britain, she archly confessed that the sin of the ancient Greeks was envy. Then she read a paean to the Greek sky and the Greek mind, and recalled that the Greek language was so beautiful that, quote, "the mere sound filled my husband with wild enthusiasm at a time when he did not yet know a word of Greek." End of quote. She concluded with, quote, "an appeal to the English ladies to teach their children the sonorous language of my ancestors, so that they may be enabled to read Homer and our other immortal classics in the original." End of quote. At the end, she was saluted by a standing ovation. Heinrich wrote, "As I heard and saw the ovation given to my Sophitheon by such a notable assemblage, I could only wonder why the great gods of Olympus had given me this woman as a wife, friend, colleague, and lover. My eyes ran with tears so I could barely see." The press corps that followed the Schliemann's made their own demands. When, as at Tiryns, the digging was slow, the New York Times correspondent immediately announced that Heinrich's luck had run out, only days before one of his most spectacular finds, the remains of a palace rivaling that at Troy or Mycenae. In those primitive decades of the daily press, cameras were still cumbersome and only barely portable. When Schliemann unearthed the remarkably preserved bodies in the tombs at Mycenae, he had no photographer along, and so sent urgently for an artist to paint likenesses before the bodies disintegrated. His books on his excavations still contained no photographs, though some of the drawings were copied from photographs. The first report on archaeological excavation to include photography was not Schliemann's, but the German archaeologist Alexander Konze's report on his diggings in Samothrace in 1873. When we compare these photographs with the rude line illustrations of earlier reports, we see how much the camera has increased the vividness of history, making millions eager to see more. And this concludes Chapter 73 in The Discoverers.